6,000. That is how many demons were living inside one man. They had snapped every chain the town could forge. They had terrorized an entire region. No human being on earth could restrain him. But the moment Jesus stepped off a boat onto that shore, all 6,000 fell on their knees and begged. They did not beg for mercy. They did not beg for freedom. They begged to enter pigs. 2,000 pigs feeding on a hillside. Why? What do demons know about pigs that we don't? And why did Jesus say yes, knowing it would destroy an entire town's economy to save one man that nobody wanted? Because what happened on that shore was not a miracle. It was a military operation, a one-man invasion into enemy territory. And the cost of that operation reveals exactly what heaven thinks a single human life is worth. If you are new here, please subscribe, and let us begin. To understand what happened at the tombs, you need to understand what Jesus left behind to get there. He was in Galilee, the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, Jewish territory, and he was in the middle of the most explosive season of ministry anyone in that region had ever seen. Thousands following him from village to village, healings that left entire towns speechless, teaching so powerful he had to stand in a boat offshore because the crowds pressing in would have crushed him on the beach. Everything was working. The momentum was building. The people wanted more. And then, Mark 4:35, Jesus turns to his disciples and says 5 words. Let us go over to the other side. The other side, the eastern shore, the Decapolis, 10 Greek cities built on land that was, by every standard of Jewish law, unclean. Gentile territory, pagan temples, Roman military garrisons, and pig farms. Thousands of pigs grazing on the hillsides above the lake. No respectable Jewish rabbi would set foot there. There was no synagogue waiting on the eastern shore, no Jewish audience, no invitation. Jesus aimed the boat at the most ritually polluted destination in the entire region. He did not drift there by accident. He steered toward it. Because someone was waiting in a graveyard who no one else on earth would go to save. And the moment that boat left the western shore, the enemy responded. Mark 4:37. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. The Greek word for this storm is leilaps, a sudden, violent, freak squall. Not a normal weather pattern. It appeared out of nowhere on a lake surrounded by hills. The disciples, several of whom were professional fishermen who had spent their entire adult lives on this water, were absolutely convinced they were going to die. Jesus was asleep, on a cushion, in the stern. In the middle of a storm that was filling the boat with water, God was taking a nap. They shook him awake. Teacher, don't you care if we drown? Mark 4:39. He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, Quiet, be still. The wind died down, and it was completely calm. Here is the detail that changes everything. The word Mark uses for rebuked is the Greek word epitimao. Now look at where else Mark uses this exact same word in his gospel. Mark 1:25. Jesus epitimao rebukes a demon in the synagogue at Capernaum. Mark 9:25. Jesus epitimao rebukes a deaf and mute spirit tormenting a boy. The same word, the same authority, the same commanding voice. He spoke to the wind the way he speaks to entities. Because the storm was not weather. It was a spiritual blockade. The enemy knew where that boat was heading. He knew who was waiting on the eastern shore. And he tried to sink the mission before it could land. The sea was a weapon aimed at Jesus. Remember that. It will come back. And there is one more thing the viewer needs to understand about where Jesus was going. When he stepped onto that eastern shore, he walked into a place where every single category of defilement under the Mosaic law was concentrated in one location: Gentile territory, unclean. Tombs. Contact with the dead made a person ritually impure for 7 days under Numbers 19. A naked man, exposed and shamed. A bleeding man, cutting himself with stones, and blood contact was defilement under Leviticus 15. Pigs, the most explicitly unclean animal in the Torah, listed by name in Leviticus 11:7. And the sea itself, in Hebrew cosmology, the deep, the Tehom, was the domain of chaos and evil, the primordial waters that God subdued at creation. 6 layers of uncleanness, all in 1 square mile. The entire religious system of Israel was designed to keep people away from exactly this kind of place. No priest could function here. No rabbi could touch this man. The law could not reach him. He was beyond the jurisdiction of the temple, the priesthood, and the covenant itself. And Jesus sailed straight into it, because grace goes where law cannot reach. The boat touched the shore. Jesus stepped onto the beach. And before he could take a second step, the reason for the entire crossing came screaming out of the tombs. Mark 5:2-5. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. Read that description slowly. This is not a sick man. This is a human being who has been systematically dismantled from the inside out. He is naked. Mark does not state this directly, but when the townspeople later find him healed, he is described as dressed, which means before he was not. His dignity has been stripped. The most basic human covering, clothing, has been taken from him. He is cutting himself with stones. His own hands have become weapons against his own body. The thing inside him is using him to destroy himself. He lives in tombs. Not caves, tombs. Carved-out burial chambers where the dead are placed. He is living among corpses because the living have given up on him. Society made its decision. He belongs with the dead. The town tried to restrain him with heavy iron chains, hand and foot, and he snapped them, not once. Mark says often. They tried this repeatedly. Chained him. He broke free. Chained him again. He broke free again. Finally, they stopped trying. He was written off, abandoned, a living ghost, already dead in the eyes of every person who once knew his name. Night and day, howling, cutting, bleeding, alone. And then the man sees Jesus, and something extraordinary happens. He does not attack. Mark 5:6. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. The demons recognized Jesus before the disciples fully understood who he was. They screamed, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." They used his full title, Son of the Most High God. 6,000 entities, and not one of them had the courage to stand. They fell on their knees and begged. But here is what happened next, and most people read past it without stopping. Mark 5:8. For Jesus had been saying to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." The Greek verb is in the imperfect tense. Had been saying. Not once. Not a single command. Jesus was repeatedly, continuously commanding the spirit to come out. Over and over. Pressing through resistance. The demons were holding on. Jesus did not stop. He kept speaking. He kept commanding. He kept pressing until the wall cracked. This was not a casual miracle performed with a snap of the fingers. This was a sustained engagement. Jesus fought for this man. And then, in the middle of that sustained assault, he paused and asked a question that had nothing to do with the demons. Mark 5:9. Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" Stop here. Most people read this as an interrogation. Jesus demanding intel from the enemy commander. And on one level, that is happening. But on a deeper level, something far more significant is taking place. What is your name? Not, what are you? Not, how many of you are there? Not, what do you want? He asked, what is your name? Jesus was looking past 6,000 screaming entities and speaking to the human being buried beneath them. He was asking the question that no one in this man's life had asked in years, perhaps decades. Not, what is wrong with you? Not, why can't you be controlled? But, who are you? And the man could not answer. The demons answered for him. My name is Legion, for we are many. His identity had been completely consumed. He no longer had a name, he had a number. 6,000 voices speaking through one throat. The person was gone. Only the occupation remained. But Jesus had asked the question, and that question, what is your name, would echo long after the demons were gone. Legion. The word the demons chose was not random. It was a precise Roman military term. A Roman legion was a unit of approximately 6,000 heavily armed professional soldiers, the most feared fighting force in the ancient world. A single legion could conquer a small nation. When these demons identified themselves, they used the language of an occupying army. And there is a detail that transforms this passage from a miracle story into something far more layered. The Roman legion, known to have operated in this broader region of the eastern Mediterranean, the military unit whose presence dominated the landscape, was the Legio Ex Fretensis, the 10th Legion of the Strait. Their official military standards and coins bore multiple symbols, and among their primary emblems, stamped on pottery, etched into stonework, displayed on their banners, was a wild boar, a pig. The Roman legion that physically occupied that territory used a pig as its symbol. The demonic legion that spiritually occupied this man called itself by the same military term, and it would be destroyed by the very animal the Roman army marched under. This was a spiritual military occupation mocking the physical one. The demons were not simply possessing a man, they were claiming territory. They were an occupying force using the language and the imagery of empire. And Jesus walked onto that beach as a one-man invasion force sent to liberate the prisoner of war. But the demons had one fear greater than Jesus' authority, to cast them out. Luke 8:31, and they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss, Greek, abyssos, the bottomless pit, the unfathomable deep. This is not a metaphor. This is not a vague idea of punishment. The abyss appears throughout Scripture as a specific, functioning prison for spiritual beings who crossed the ultimate boundary. 2 Peter 2:4. God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. The Greek word translated hell in that verse is not Gehenna, not Hades, it is Tartarus, a word used only once in the entire New Testament. A holding cell in the deepest darkness. Jude verse 6. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. These are the fallen angels of Genesis 6, the watchers who crossed the line between heaven and earth and corrupted the human race. They are already locked in the abyss, chained, waiting for judgment. And Legion knew about that prison, not from rumor, not from speculation. These 6,000 demons begged, the text says repeatedly, not to be sent there because their kind was already locked inside. They had seen what happens to spiritual beings who go too far. They knew the sentence was real because their predecessors were already serving it. 6,000 entities against one carpenter from Nazareth, and they were the ones begging for their lives. They could not fight him. They could not flee him. So they negotiated. Mark 5:11-12, a large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them." 2,000 pigs, grazing on the slopes above the Sea of Galilee. In Gentile territory where pork was standard commerce, a massive herd representing an enormous fortune. The demons wanted a host, any host, because a disembodied spirit without a physical vessel is homeless. Jesus himself describes this state in Matthew 12:43. An unclean spirit cast out of a person wanders through arid places, restless, seeking a body, finding no rest. For a demon, possession is not preference, it is survival. They saw the pigs and calculated, best deal available. Stay in the physical world, stay in the region, avoid the abyss, lose the man, keep a foothold. Jesus said one word, go. And this is the question every viewer is asking. Why did he allow it? He had absolute authority. He could have sent them to the abyss. He could have destroyed them outright. Why permit the transfer? Because Jesus was not performing a quiet exorcism. He was making a statement that the entire region would remember for the rest of its history. He needed the town to see the scale of what had been inside this man. 2,000 pigs, a visible, countable, staggering number, stampeding off a cliff. The scope of the possession had to be made visible so the scope of the deliverance could be understood. And there was a deeper layer, one the demons did not see. The moment the legion entered the herd, 2,000 pigs charged down the steep bank and plunged into the Sea of Galilee. Every last one drowned. The sea. The exact same body of water that the enemy had weaponized 1 hour earlier to try to drown Jesus and his disciples. The storm was supposed to kill the rescue team in the water. Instead, the water killed the legion. The weapon the enemy aimed at Christ became the weapon Christ aimed at the enemy. Same sea, same waves, reversed outcome, total destruction. The demons did not negotiate a compromise. They negotiated their own execution. They thought the pigs were a lifeboat. The pigs were a coffin. And Jesus, who sees the end from the beginning, said go, because he already knew what was waiting at the bottom of that hill. The herdsmen ran. They sprinted to the town and the surrounding countryside, telling everyone what had happened. And the people came. They rushed to the shore to see for themselves. They found two things. First, the pigs were gone. 2,000 animals vanished into the sea. And the economic weight of that loss needs to be understood in real terms. A single pig in the first-century economy could fetch 1 to 2 denarii. 1 denarius was a full day's wages for a common laborer. Jesus himself uses this figure in the parable of the workers in the vineyard. 2,000 pigs at market value represented somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 days' wages. That is 6 to 11 years of labor for an entire working household, gone in seconds. Jesus did not cause an inconvenience. He collapsed a sector of the regional economy, and he did it for one man. The math is the message. 2,000 pigs, a decade of wealth, exchanged for a single human being that the town had already thrown away. That is not a side effect of a miracle. That is a price tag. And it tells you exactly what heaven thinks one human soul is worth. Second, the man. Mark 5:15. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Sitting, not howling, not running, not slamming himself against rocks, sitting calmly at the feet of Jesus. Dressed. He had been naked. Now he was clothed. And the text does not say who dressed him. But there were only a handful of people on that shore. Jesus and his disciples. Someone took garments from their own body and placed them on a man who had been stripped of everything. The text passes over this detail in silence. But the echo is unmistakable. Genesis 3:21. After Adam and Eve sinned and stood naked and ashamed in the garden, God himself made garments of skin and clothed them. It is one of the oldest acts of God recorded in Scripture. When a human being is exposed, stripped, shamed, God's first response is to cover them. From the garden to the graveyard, it is his signature. In his right mind. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, this man was thinking his own thoughts, hearing his own voice, sitting in his own body. The 6,000 voices were silent. The occupation was over. And the town's response was more disturbing than the demons. Mark 5:15. They were afraid, not grateful, not amazed, not weeping with joy that a man they had known, a neighbor, a father, perhaps a son, was finally free. Afraid. Mark 5:17. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. They performed a calculation. On one side of the ledger, the life of one man, a man they had already written off, already chained, already abandoned among the dead. On the other side, 2,000 pigs, a fortune. They chose the pigs. They looked at a human being who had been rescued from decades of torment, sitting peacefully for the first time in his adult life, and they decided that his freedom was too expensive. The cost of one man's deliverance exceeded what they were willing to pay. And the word Mark uses for their pleading, they begged Jesus to leave, is the same category of word the demons used when they begged not to be sent to the abyss. The demons begged from fear of judgment. The townspeople begged from fear of further loss. Both wanted Jesus gone, both for the same reason. His presence was too costly. Jesus honored their request. He did not argue. He did not perform another miracle to change their minds. He did not force himself on a community that had weighed his presence against their wealth and chosen the wealth. He got back in the boat. But before he left, something happened. Mark 5:18. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Of course he did. Jesus was the only person who had ever crossed a storm to find him, the only one who had asked his name, the only one who had fought for him when the demons would not let go. And now that person was leaving, going back to the other side of the lake, back to Jewish territory, back to the crowds who wanted him. Why would this man stay in the place that had chained him and left him for dead? But Jesus said no. And what he said instead would change the course of an entire region's history. Mark 5:19. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." Consider the strangeness of this command. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus consistently tells healed people to keep quiet. Mark 1:44. After cleansing a leper. See that you don't tell anyone. Mark 5:43. After raising Jairus' daughter from the dead. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this. Mark 7:36. After healing a deaf and mute man, Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone. Don't tell, don't tell, don't tell. This pattern is so consistent that scholars call it the Messianic secret, Jesus suppressing public knowledge of his identity because in Jewish territory, miracle stories triggered political expectations. the crowds would try to make him king by force. The timing was not right. But this man, the one who had been naked in a graveyard, bleeding from self-inflicted wounds, howling day and night, possessed by 6,000 demons, the most publicly shattered human being in the entire region, to this man, Jesus says the opposite. Go tell everyone. Why the reversal? Because the Decapolis was not Jewish territory. It was Gentile, Greek-speaking, pagan. There was no messianic expectation to manage, no political powder keg to avoid. And more importantly, the people there did not care about rabbinical credentials or Torah scholarship. They cared about evidence, and this man was the evidence. His body was the proof. His sanity was the sermon. His life, before and after, was the entire argument. Jesus did not need a trained theologian in the Decapolis. He needed a witness, and the most powerful witness on earth is not the one with the best education. It is the one with the most undeniable story. Mark 5:20. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. He went, not to one household, not to one village. He traveled through the entire Decapolis, 10 cities, and told his story in every one. A man who an hour earlier could not speak his own name was now walking through a Gentile circuit, proclaiming what God had done. He is the first recorded evangelist to the non-Jewish world in the New Testament. Not Paul, not Peter, not a trained apostle with years of preparation. A formerly naked, bleeding, screaming man from a graveyard who had not known his own identity since the demons took it. And his mission worked beyond anything the disciples could have imagined. Mark 7:31. Jesus returns to the Decapolis, the same region that had begged him to leave, and this time the reception is completely different. Mark 8:1. During those days another large crowd gathered, thousands of people, in the territory that once asked Jesus to go away, waiting for him, ready to listen, and Jesus feeds 4,000 of them, a miracle recorded separately from the feeding of the 5,000, which occurred in Jewish territory. The numbers carry their own message. In Jewish territory, 5,000 were fed, and 12 baskets were left over. 12, the number of Israel's tribes. In the Decapolis, 4,000 were fed, and 7 baskets remained. 7, the biblical number of divine completeness. The Gentile harvest was complete because one man's testimony had prepared the soil. The seed that Jesus planted in a graveyard, one restored life, one commission, one testimony, produced a harvest of 4,000, and the pattern held to the end. Every weapon the enemy deployed was turned against him. The sea that was supposed to drown Jesus drowned the demons. The pigs that were supposed to be the demons' escape became their grave. The man who was supposed to be the enemy's permanent trophy became heaven's first ambassador to the Gentile world. The graveyard that was supposed to be his final address became the place where he received a new life. And the brokenness that was supposed to be his permanent shame became the only credential he needed. Jesus does not waste anything, not the storm, not the pigs, not the years in the tombs, not the scars on the man's body. He redeems it all and turns the enemy's entire strategy into evidence for the other side. There is one detail we need to return to, the one that holds this entire passage together. Jesus' first act on that shore was not a display of power. It was not a command. It was not a rebuke, or an exorcism, or a demonstration of authority. It was a question. What is your name? He looked past 6,000 screaming voices and spoke to the one person buried beneath them all. He did not see a monster. He did not see a lost cause. He did not see what the town saw, a problem to be chained and forgotten. He saw a man who had been stripped of everything a person can be stripped of: clothing, dignity, sanity, community, identity. And his first instinct was not to fix the problem. It was to find the person. That question was never for the demons. It was for the man. Because deliverance does not begin with power. It begins when someone sees you, not the thing that has attached itself to you, not the addiction that speaks louder than your own thoughts, not the anxiety that answers every question before you can, not the cycle you have tried to break 100 times and failed, not the label the world has assigned to you. You. And consider what Jesus crossed to ask that question. He left a ministry that was working. He climbed into a boat on a calm sea that turned violent. He rebuked a storm that was trying to kill him. He stepped onto unclean ground that every religious authority in his world would have avoided. He walked into a graveyard. He faced 6,000 entities that knew his name and his title and his authority. And he pressed through their resistance again and again and again, because Mark tells us he had been commanding them repeatedly, and they were not letting go. He did all of that for one man. He did not send a disciple. He did not send a message. He did not wait for the man to find clothes, break his own chains, clean himself up, and swim across the Sea of Galilee to ask for help. He got in the boat. He crossed the storm. He walked into the most defiled place on earth. And he looked at the most destroyed man alive and asked his name. The town chained this man and walked away. Jesus crossed a sea and fought for him. And when it was over, when the chains were broken and the legion was drowned, and the man was sitting in his right mind for the first time in years, Jesus did not hand him a theology degree. He did not enroll him in 3 years of training. He did not tell him to study until he was qualified. He said, "Go home and tell them what happened to you." Your story is the credential. Your worst chapter, the one you never talk about, the one that replays at 2 in the morning, the one you believe disqualifies you from anything good, that is the chapter God will use, not in spite of the brokenness, because of it. The man who could not say his own name became the voice that opened 10 cities to the gospel and fed 4,000 people. His scars were his sermon. His past was his proof. And the God who crossed a storm for a man in a graveyard is the same God reaching for you right now. There is no tomb too dark. There is no chain too heavy. There is no legion too large. There is no distance he will not cross. No storm he will not walk through. No ground too unclean for him to stand on. If you are on the other side, he will not wait for you to get clean. He will come to where you are. And when he arrives, he will not ask what you have done, or how far you have fallen, or how many times you have failed. He will ask the only question that has ever mattered. If this has opened your understanding of God's Word, leave a like so others can find the truth. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments. Share what stood out to you the most today. And make sure to subscribe and explore the channel for more videos that go deep into the Scriptures.